There was a story going around about a month ago of a woman who worked for, if I'm not mistaken, Jetstar, who was sacked on the basis of vaccine discrimination, and it was taken to the Fair Work Commission and her case was dismissed. Are you trying to shed more light on cases like that?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, there was a Cooper's Brewery case where the Fair Work Commissioner Coleman said that he wasn't going to question the advice from Atagi because they were the experts. Well, I mean, the Fair Work Commission is meant to be independent from the government. They're meant to be an independent body, and yet they were going to take the government's expert at their word and not the experts from the sacked employees. And I have got a real problem with the Fair Work Commission. In my view, they are not upholding the laws of the land. They're not upholding the Charter of the Immunisation Register, which says people can't be coerced into getting a vaccine. They're not upholding employment contracts. There was nothing in the employment contract that said people had to take a jab that was only provisionally approved and didn't go through didn't go through thorough safety testing. So there was a change in the terms and conditions of the contract there. And we know just last year with Peter Ridd in the High Court, even though the High Court ruled that what Peter Ridd said was not wrong because he wasn't allowed to speak out about his particular employment circumstances, that's why they upheld the JCU dismissal. Well, if that's the case, and they ruled on that because they said the employment contract was king. Well, in my case, then, my view, if the employment contract is king, why isn't Fair Work Commissioners, why aren't the Fair Work Commissioners upholding the employment contract? And there was nothing in the employment contract that forced employees to get a vaccine that hadn't been adequately tested. And subsequently, by the way, the Chief Health Officer has said, the Federal Chief Health Officer said numerous times throughout the rollout that he doesn't support vaccine mandates. And yet state governments and employees are doing just that. They are mandating the vaccine against the advice of the Federal Chief Health Officer.
It's almost as if all these bodies are predisposed to discriminate not against the unvaccinated, but just against ordinary people. Anyway, let's move from these government bodies to the law, because the media has been reluctant to report the class action lawsuit that was filed in the federal court last week, which I'm sure you know plenty about. It was filed by a doctor from your state, Queensland, Melissa McCann. There are about 500 people associated with the lawsuit, but the number of claimants could total thousands or tens of thousands. Now, this is a lawsuit against the Therapeutic Goods Administration on behalf of people who claim to have been injured or have had relatives killed by the vaccines. Now, firstly, Gerard, why is the media not interested in this story? It's huge.
Well, the media hasn't been interested in vaccine injuries from the get-go. I mean, I was one of the first, actually, I was probably the first politician to speak out about vaccine injuries. I was very quickly ridiculed by large sections of the press who claimed that these injuries hadn't been verified and that I was an anti-vaxxer. I contacted many of these journalists and I said, well, look, you're welcome. I will pass you on the contact details of the vaccine injured and you can verify these injuries yourself if you don't want to believe me. And, of course, needless to say, these journalists wouldn't follow up with any of the vaccine injured. Eventually, I think there's been a grudging acceptance by the media that there has been injuries from the vaccine, but they still yet claim that, the benefits outweigh the risks, which I completely disagree with, especially for people who are healthy and under 60 and even over 60 if they're healthy. And obviously they don't want to do that because they got it wrong. Yeah. And, when they went around and took, the government's money to basically advertise these vaccines as safe and effective. And I think, if they were to admit they got it wrong, they could be liable for injury and basically false advertising, false and misleading advertising.
Has anyone ever looked into whether or not the government was paying the media companies to back the government's line?
Well, they weren't being paid to back the government's line, but they were being paid to advertise the vaccine. There's no secret about that. They were paid millions and millions of dollars.